Good morning, everybody. We are entering the 64th session of Lex webinar series. And today we have the pleasure of having a resource person for the second time in our webinar. And she is senior advocate, Ms. Chitra Sampath. She has done her BSc chemistry from University of Mumbai, Bombay, in the year 1979. Thereafter, she has finished her law course from Dr. Ambedkar Law College at Pondicherry. She secured the first rank in BGL in Chennai University, and she secured the first rank in BL also from Ambedkar Law College, Pondicherry. She was also the recipient of Certificate of Merit for the Moot Court in the year 1981 to 82, conducted by the Bar Council of India. She secured the second prize in individual performance in All India Moot Court in 1982-83. And she enrolled herself as an advocate in 1980. From 83 to 86, she was practicing in District Court at Kadalur under Sri M.N. Krishnamurthy advocate and her son Justice K. Kannan. She was practicing in civil, family, property, guardians and wards, rent control, and all the trial and executive works and appeal works, in addition to drafting and conveyancing in the District Court at Kadalur. In 1987, she shifted her practice to Chennai and joined the office of Mr. T.R. Rajagopal and T.R. Rajaram. And she was practicing in Chennai High Court. In 1998, she set up her independent practice. In the year 2012, she was designated as a senior advocate by the Madras High Court. Her area of practice would include writ side, property, rent control, constitution matters, company matters, probate, Hindu law, contract, specific relief, negotiable instruments, trust, HR and CE, Waqfs, family disputes, and gasping MACP office also. And she has got a lot of reported cases to her credit, and she has been a regular resource person in Tamil Nadu State Judicial Academy. And she is one of the certified mediators attached to the mediation of Madras High Court. The credentials are many more. And with this brief introduction, may I now request Ms. Chitra Sampath, Senior Advocate, to handle the floor. Ma'am, the form is yours. Welcome.
Good morning to everyone. And it's a pleasure to be a part of this theme, to share whatever I have gained in my years of practice. And today, what I'm going to do is what I have been breathing and drinking and eating. Just be my forte. And only a part of it I have taken today. So every time I read, I refresh, I find new points in the CPC. And it is so full of variations that it varies with case to case. And coming to application, it's going to be a very tough exercise for juniors. In fact, even after so many years of practice, I had never realized that the appeal has not been defined under the CPC. I asked my two juniors to ask them to go through the provisions of the CPC once Srinivas Raghavan gave me this topic. Asked them to go through the provisions and give me the relevant provisions in which appeal is contemplated. So I told them they have to give me a write-up and forward it by way of mail. So both of them did it by way of separate mail. And one of them, his name is Muhammad Irfan Ali. He opened this with a statement, appeal is not defined in the code. I was taken aback. Then he extracts Black's Law Dictionary as to what is defined in the appeal. It's very interesting to read that definition. It says, the complaint to a superior court for an injustice done or error committed by an inferior one, whose judgment or decision the court above is called upon to correct or reverse. It is the removal of a cause from a court of inferior jurisdiction to one of superior jurisdiction for the purpose of obtaining a review or retrial. In fact, I was amazed that in all these years, I have never realized that appeal has not been defined in the code. We take everything for granted. And in the years which roll by, we even tend to think that we know everything, but actually we don't know anything. These lectures help us to revise and edit ourselves where we have gone wrong. So I have taken this opportunity to present to all of you what is known to me and what I have understood from CPC. Now, with this introduction about what is an appeal, I'll now share my screen. As I was saying, an appeal is a remedy where you're going to complain about the fallacies in the judgment of the trial court and then the superior court. This right of appeal is statutory and it can never be lost by contract or by any other way. So normally, who will be the person who will be approaching the court, appellate court, is the party who is agreed with the judgment or decree. Suppose after the judgment, he dies. Who will be the person to proceed? The legal representatives. What the legal representatives have to do is they have to file an application for accepting cause title, and then an appeal is filed. There's no question of impleading a party by presenting it appeal in a way of a dead person. See, there is always a confusion in that point. Suppose a man dies after the disposal of the appeal, then who will file the appeal? The legal representatives. Legal representative name does not appear in the cause letter, this cause title. So what we do is we accept cause title as far as the high courts are concerned. Even in the lower courts, the appeal is presented in the name of the legal representative. The deceased party is shown as so and so dead. And in the cause title, in the high court, we never give a rank to a dead person at the time of filing itself. If he died after the filing of the appeal, he'll be given a rank, but not before. So you have to show so and so died, legal ad so and so. Then, in fact, in one case, what happened was it was in an SR stage. Appeal was not even taken on file, it was in a condoned delay stage. It came before GRSJ, one of the parties died. So I filed an application to set aside abatement and bring on record. Rajsurya said there's no question, there's no proceeding pending. You're still, representation delay was there. You are only in the question of representation delay. So question of abatement or anything does not arise. Representation delay will not be treated as a main proceeding. Main proceedings alone can abate. Therefore, you file just an application to implead. So in a representation delay petition pending that, when the appellant died, I filed an application to bring on record the legal heirs and continue the proceeding. So this is the right of the legal representatives of a party to the proceeding. Suppose pendenti light, or even prior to the suit there has been a subsequent purchaser who was not impleaded as a party in the suit, even though he has purchased it earlier. He, of course, his right is not affected, but he can file an appeal. Or if he's a pendenti light purchaser, even though it is hit by dispendence, suddenly his vendor doesn't want to prosecute the appeal and he just sits tight at home, or the man dies and legal representatives are not willing to go on record, it is open to the purchaser who has purchased the property to prefer an appeal. And finally, if you read section 96, it makes a very interesting thing that an appeal shall lie in the court. It never says a party who is aggrieved shall file an appeal. That is not so. If you go to section 47, if you go to order 21, other provisions will specifically say who can file that particular proceeding. But when it comes to an appeal, it doesn't say it is a party to the proceeding who can file an appeal. So any person who is affected by an order or judgment, he can file an appeal under section 96 and further proceeding under section 100. So this is the crux of the issue. Now, we'll have to see appeal provisions are twofold in the CPC. One is against decrees, the other against orders. Now, what are all decrees? You have to know. Then what are all orders? You will be covered by Order 43 Rule 1, which is appealable. So what is not mentioned in Order 43 Rule 1, that is orders appealable, it will be revisable. That is all interlocutory orders or orders in execution. If it is an appeal from a decree, what is a decree? So first we will go to the definition of the decree in a CPC. It says an adjudication on merits which disposes of the suit, including a rejection of plaint and also an order for restitution. We go and see section 144 of CPC for restitution. It will not provide remedy by way of appeal. You will not find what is the remedy for a disposal of an application under section 144 in other provisions of CPC. You have to see section 2.2 of the CPC definition to know what is a decree. So an order under section 144 is treated as a decree. An order rejecting a suit under order 7 rule 11 is treated as a decree, and the normal adjudication of the suit is treated as a decree. Now these are the main ones which are covered under the definition. Now there are the concept of a deemed decree. That is where third party claims are entertained by the court. See, there is an attachment before judgment, order 38 rule 5. Then a third party says, no, this is not the property of the judgment debtor, it belongs to me, therefore raise the attachment. So he files an application. So that is decided and disposed of under order 38 rule 8. That is treated as a judgment and decree. Similarly, when an attachment is sought to be raised in execution under order 21 rule 58, 55 is the attachment, 58 is an application to raise the attachment. So that is a third party who comes and says, this is not the property of the judgment debtor. The decree holder cannot proceed against my property. Please raise the attachment. Prior to 1976, the CPC said, if suppose a person who came to court knocking at the door of, for raising attachment came with a delay, he was given an option to file a separate suit under order 21 rule 63. But what happened was, when such applications were dismissed on ground of delay or latches, no, you go and fight it out in a separate forum, and they started filing a civil suit, and therefore they stultified and prevented the execution of the earlier decree. That is the reason to avoid multiplication of suits and delay in execution of the validly obtained decree. Order 21 rule 63 was deleted from the CPC, and all questions relating to right, title, and interest of the judgment debtor in the proceeding shall be decided and disposed of by a judgment, and that order will be deemed to be a decree against which you have a right of appeal, like a regular suit. So order 38 rule 5 and order 21 rule 58 will be a decision as though you are going to conduct a suit. The third party will come and say, this is my property, right, title, and interest will be decided like a regular suit, even though whether it is in execution or even dependency of the suit is yet to be disposed of. Therefore, you will say the JD has no right. So decide whether judgment debtor is entitled to the property or I am entitled to the property. That is the third party claim. Now, in the course of execution, when the decree holder goes and tries to take possession, then there will be obstruction. Or we may even execute the decree and there will be an application for redelivery of possession by a third party. So there also a third party claim will enter into the frame. So in those cases also, the CPC says, any decision which affects a third party in execution with reference to his right, title, and interest in a particular property will be treated like a suit and it will be tried like a suit, and the judgment which is pronounced there will be deemed to be a decree. So once it is deemed to be a decree, then you have to file a regular appeal in the normal course. Suppose you have filed, the suit is filed in the DMC court, the execution application, any decision is taken, the appellate court will be the sub-court depending upon the value. Similarly, in sub-court, it will be to the district court. So the main suit from which you have to go to the appellate court, even in the execution, whatever may be the value of the property that is being brought for sale or whatever may be the value, the valuation doesn't come into the picture at all. The regular suit from which you are going to which court there's an appeal, the same way you have to go for an appeal in the execution court also. So these are all the various provisions or decrees against which you have a right of appeal. Now, there are in the mortgage suit and in a partition suit, there are two types of decrees. Everybody knows it is a preliminary decree and a final decree. A preliminary decree is where, in case of mortgage suits, it will decide if it is a suit for redemption. It will say that how much amount is due. The mortgagor has to make the payment on or before filing bill, failing which the mortgagee is entitled to approach the court for sale of the hypotheca. Similarly, if it is a mortgagee suits for sale and foreclosure, the preliminary decree will say the mortgagor shall bring into the court so much of money on or before a particular date, failing which the mortgagee will be entitled to proceed further with the sale of the hypotheca. So it's called a preliminary decree, and once that is not satisfied, then we have a final decree. Similarly, in a partition suit, the preliminary decree will decide what are the shares of the parties. Interestingly, a preliminary decree in a partition suit, it will say the plaintiff is entitled to 1/4 share in the property. It is a joint family property. The father, his two brothers are there. Then there are his mother and others are also there party to the suit. Suppose the court says it is 1/4 share of the son, the plaintiff. Pending suit, the father dies. So his share will devolve on the other sharers. So there can be another preliminary decree saying that the plaintiff's share is enhanced. There can be another preliminary decree. So because of the change in the circumstances, there can be another preliminary decree. And then final decree also, there can be 2 or more final decrees, because one final decree will say how the properties can be divided. The second final decree can say what is the income and how it can be apportioned, for which an advocate commissioner will be appointed. So these are 2 different type of decrees in which you have a right of appeal. The first appeal, you all know that is covered under section 96. As I pointed out, it is an appeal provided against the judgment. It is not particular to who is the person who can file an appeal. Any person who is agreed with the judgment can file an appeal. Once an appeal is there before the appellate court, it is as though the entire suit is before the appellate court. The appellate court can decide the entire cause from top to bottom, just to read the plain. It is like another trial court only, because the court has to reappreciate the entire evidence on record and deliver a judgment. Now, in the course of the trial, you would have filed an application for appointment of advocate commissioner, or you would have filed an application for receipt of documents. So in which it would have gone against you. It would have been very, if you are entitled to challenge by way of revision, but you have not exercised the power of revision. But there is no right of appeal for such type of orders. In those cases, when you file an appeal against the judgment, if you are agreed about any interlocutory order for which has to be considered for your disposal of the suit and the issues in the suit, and it has gone against you, you have to raise those grounds specifically in the appeal grounds. You have to say this judgment, suppose a commissioner ought to have been appointed, your application has been dismissed for various reasons. You can challenge that also in the grounds, that is enabling provision under Order 43, Rule 1A. So you need not come by way of revision every time to the High Court, because I'll let you know in a subsequent I refer to that also again. What happened was, in an interlocutory order, I suffered an order against which I go by way of revision to the High Court. The revision is dismissed. So once the revision is dismissed by the High Court, I cannot challenge that order once again in my grounds of appeal. It becomes res judicata as far as that application is concerned. So please do not take risk in coming to High Court for all these matters, because at the time when you file the grounds of appeal, it is better that you incorporate it, and so that you may even succeed in getting a remand of the order. Now, there are cases where joint trials are held. Joint trials are held where there will be counterblast suit. In one, a person will be a plaintiff, the other he may be a defendant. A joint trial is held. There are also simultaneous trials. There can be a common judgment or separate judgment. If there is a separate judgment, no problem, you can file an appeal separately. But when it comes to a common judgment, invariably many people get confused as to whether I have to file 1 appeal or 2 appeal or how many appeals. If there are 1 suit, 1 decree, 1 appeal is sufficient. If there are several suits, you have to file separate appeals, because if you don't file an appeal against the connected suit, any common finding recorded in both the suits will become res judicata. And if your claim is based on that finding and you want to reverse that finding in your appeal, you must file an appeal against the other connected suits also. So be careful when you want to file an appeal. Whether if you are not a party there, you must get a leave to appeal, because you have allowed the matter to be decided by a common judgment. You have to get rid of that judgment, because today the appellate court wants to make a finding in your favor. It cannot give a conflicting finding in respect of the common finding which has been recorded in the connected suit without hearing them. So there will be a conflict. Therefore, whenever you are going to challenge a particular decree, even though you may not be a party in the connected suit, but if it has been allowed to be jointly tried and a common judgment is passed, if you want to set aside a finding or even a particular portion of the decree, you have to file an appeal against that also. Please don't forget to file several appeals if in case of necessity. Similarly, in suits for partition and in even other cases, I find that when persons are remaining ex parte, you don't make them party to the proceedings. That is incorrect. In a partition suit, you have to make everybody who is a sharer as a party in the appeal, irrespective of whether they are remaining ex parte or not. If they are remaining ex parte, you need not pay BATA. You are entitled to have a dispense with, which is provided with the Madras Amendment. Therefore, whenever you are filing an appeal, ensure that all the parties are before the court. Because in case you don't impede an appeal for a person who was a party there, the judgment between that person, the person whom you are not impeded, and the agreed party will become final. So that will become res judicata. Therefore, it is better that you bring all the parties in the memorandum of appeal who are being present in the court below. And how will you value the appeal? Now the Court Fees Act have come, and whatever is the valuation in the suit is adopted in the appeals also. But in case of money decrease, I find that in some of the memorandum of ground, they adopt the same valuation in the suit, which is incorrect. Suppose the suit is decreed for money with a particular payment of interest. You have to calculate the interest up to the date of decree against which you are filing the appeal. If it is a first appellate decree, up to the date of suit decree, it is up to the date of suit decree. If it is a first appellate decree, it is up to the first appellate decree. So till then, you have to calculate the interest, pay court fee. Suppose you don't do it, the court will say that you have not challenged the portion of the interest, and they have not set aside the judgment even in those cases. That your main case also will be lost. Therefore, be careful in any money suit. You will have to calculate the interest portion also in your memorandum of valuation. Now let's see that in what cases the first appeal is maintainable. It says that if it is suit of a small cost nature, then if it does not exceed the value of 10,000 rupees, you have no right of first appeal. You have to file only a revision. Now, when you have an appeal, and again, you have gone for a consent decree. There is a compromise decree under Order 23, Rule 3. Suppose I am agreed whether I can file an appeal against that order. It says no. There's a specific bar which says you have no right of appeal against a consent decree. Then what is the remedy of a person who wants to challenge a compromise decree? In fact, if I forgot to note, in a recent judgment of the Supreme Court, a stranger cannot file a separate suit to set aside a compromise decree. In fact, that was a recent 2020 judgment. You cannot maintain a separate suit for setting aside a compromise decree. You cannot file an appeal against the judgment of the compromise. Then what is the remedy? You want to avoid a decree. You have to go approach the same court, file an application, and present saying, because a compromise decree is passed by the court satisfying itself that the parties have entered into a compromise. So that becomes sacrosanct. When the parties have agreed before a judge and they have signed, it becomes sacrosanct. You cannot resile from that compromise. Therefore, you have to go and tell the court itself that at the time you made and recorded the compromise, these were the situations which is vitiated for these grounds. Therefore, please set aside. Or my consent was obtained by force or coercion, whatever the ground which is allowable under law for initiating a contract. You have to plead it before the same court by way of separate application in the Order 23 application. Therefore, there is no appeal against a consent decree. Now, there is an ex parte decree. Can I file an appeal against an ex parte decree? Yes. Should I file an application under Order 9, Rule 13? Yes, that is a choice of election. Now I file an appeal against the appellate, the ex parte decree. What I can challenge in that? I can challenge only that portion saying that on the evidence on record written by the plaintiff, the suit has to be dismissed. That's all I can argue. I cannot plead my defense or put up new case. I cannot file documents, nothing. I can only plead that on the evidence that is adduced before the court, the suit is not maintained. In fact, in one of the cases in a suit for specific performance, what they do, they'll just put PW1 in the box, PW1 examine, A1 TA9 mark, suit is discreet as straightforward cause. It's a suit for specific performance. What is enjoined of the court to do? They must see whether the plaintiff has come to court with clean hands, whether section 16C has been satisfied, and then the court has to say that whether the suit for specific performance can be decreed or not. If nothing is addressed in the judgment, then it has become a judgment which is susceptible to be set aside by an appellate court. So the defendant, instead of going and filing an application under Order 9, Rule 13, he can straight away file an appeal against the judgment and seek to set it aside. In fact, I would advise that instead of setting aside an ex parte decree, if the judgment merely says PW1 exam, A1 to A9 marks who decreed as paid for, straight away go for a first appeal and set it aside. Except that if it's going to pinch your purse or going to pay a higher court fee in the first appellate court, otherwise this judgment is no judgment in the eye of law. That is there are several judgments to that effect. Next we are filing a appeal against a final decree. We are not unhappy about the prelim decree, but we have not challenged that, but we are filing it in a final decree. In the final decree, you cannot go and say that the prelim decree is wrong. See, that is a bar specifically provided under 97 of CPC. So this is as far as the appeals are concerned, in the first appeals are concerned. And I find under Order 41, whenever there is a suit for money decree is there, you have to make a deposit of the decree amount or furnish security. In fact, we are lucky that the courts are not insisting upon that, and High Court only says Order 41 Rule 5, 50% to be deposited. Of course, the discretion is there with the court, but the Act, the CPC specifically mandates under Order 41 Rule 3 that you have to deposit the amount that is decreed in court filing the appeal. It's not made it as a condition precedent, but it says that you have to deposit or furnish security. But that is not really adopted by the court. I am not on that. And another point which I would like to say is, we come to court with a petition to condone delay. What we have been, some of us have been doing in the High Court was, we were filing application under Section 5 of Limitation Act to condone the delay in filing the appeal. When Justice P.R. Shivakumar was there, he screwed our ears. What is this? You are all been in the High Court for so many years, you have not even read CPC. Then we all did our homework. He made us stand up on the bench literally and was about to dismiss all our applications under Section 5, saying that you should have invoked Order 41.
41 Rule 3A.
Yeah. Not Section 5. Because Section 5, read with Section 29(2) of Limitation Act, will apply only in cases where the other provisions are not there. Whereas 41 Rule 3A specifically provides for condonation of delay, even whatever maybe there's no time limit, it is a self-contained provision. So he made in fact I tried to get the judgment, I was not able to get it. So he first directed the registry not to number any application under Section 5 for condonation of delay of filing an appeal or a settlement. So please note that your application to condone delay in filing an appeal should come only under Order 41 Rule 3A, and Section 5 will have no application. Now suppose I file an appeal. It is a suit for recovery of money or suit for recovery of possession, suit for mandatory injunction, whatever may be this. The defendant is challenging the appeal before the appellate court. The plaintiff says, oh, the appeal is already being filed and he cannot sleep at his house. Suppose the defendant is not able to get an order of stay before the appellate court, then the time limit to file an execution starts running, and the defendant, the plaintiff, has to file an EP within the time limited by law. If it is a mandatory injunction, you have got hardly 1 year, if I remember right. Therefore, you have to be very, very careful that in the absence of stay, the time limit fixed under the Act will not come to, will be eluded and you will be lost. Because Order 41 Rule 5 specifically says, unless the stay is granted, there's no prevention of the decree holder from executing his decree. So this is a specific word, unless stay is granted. So if there is no stay, or the stay which has been granted is already been discontinued, then the limitation for filing the execution petition to enforce the decree will start running, and therefore, we'll all have, the decree holder will have problem. So you have to make a note that, because we are generally of the opinion, once the first appeal is filed, it will amount to automatic stay. No. First appeal, it does not amount to an automatic stay. Please take a note of that. In fact, in this, when I joined the bar in Madras High Court, once I appeared before Justice Hardy bench, it was a first appeal for recovery of money on a suit on a pro note. My office said, okay, Chitra, you go, he will ask you to deposit 50%, you get time and come back. So I just went through what is the total amount and what was the findings recorded. But the defense set out was, it is a forged document, therefore the suit ought to have been dismissed. That was the main content in the defense. And the matter was called. I got up and said, Lord, it's a suit for recovery of money. Give me 6 weeks time to deposit me amount. You know what he said? What, madam? You think that you are entitled to an order by just coming to the court? Nothing like this. You have to argue the appeal. I got shivers down my spine. What is this? Lord, this is first appeal, my lord. No, no, no. I can dismiss your appeal under Order 41, Rule 11. Noted from us. Now my tentacles opened up and said, oh, there is one provision which can dismiss even a first appeal at admission stage.
Without sending notice.
Without notice. In fact, that was the first time I came to know, because I was practicing in the trial side, and we automatically go and argue first appeal. The question of admission of appeal was never arisen in my mind. So and I was also not alerted by my senior who said, you will get 50%, you come back. Then I said, Lord, I'll just do this, I'll do that. Then took time. Next day I went and convinced the judges, and then I got an order. But that's what. See, this is a provision which enables a court to dismiss an appeal even without notice to the respondent. It doesn't mean that the court can just dismiss it in limine, saying no point made out. No, it's like a second appeal admission. If in the second appeal admission, what the High Court is directed to do is to record the submissions of the appellant, give reasoning, and then dismiss it, saying no substantial question of law. Similarly, for dismissal of an appeal without notice to the respondent, if the court finds that an appeal is frivolous or there's no defense at all, and what he is trying to do in the suit is only prolonging the issue, the court can, without even notice to the respondent, write a judgment dismissing the appeal. So that is a power under Order 41, Rule 11, which is not invariably adopted in all cases. Very, very rarely it is being invoked, except probably in the High Court. Very rarely it is also invoked there, because usually appeal is treated as a matter of admission by the deputy registrar, and only the CMP for stay is posted before the appropriate judge. But even that now, in fact, only in an OSA that point was taken up, and even in the OS appeals, we say not regular appeal, then the court just says, okay, you'll be given one more opportunity. Therefore, that's how, because of the lenient view of the judges, they are not actually strictly enforcing the provisions of Order 41, Rule 11. Now, once an appeal is filed, the hearings are coming up. In one case, what happened was, it was before Justice Murugesan. Second appeal or first appeal, I do not remember. I was not able to come from another court. In the meantime, the learned judge pronounced the judgment in favor of the appellant. Then I filed an application to set aside the judgment. He said, no, it is a judgment on merits. You cannot. I said, I was not heard. No, there's no provision. Then I had to look up, I pointed out that Order 41, Rule 21 specifically enables the respondent who has been set ex parte in a second appeal or in a first appeal to ask for a rehearing of the appeal. So, when an appeal is allowed ex parte, the provisions Order 41, Rule 21 enables the respondent ask for a rehearing of the appeal. Now, the appellant doesn't come. What happens? Can the appeal be disposed of on merits? In fact, I would say that even in the High Court, some of the judges have pronounced judgment on merits, even though the appellant counsel is absent. The court has no powers under Order 41, Rule 17 to dictate a judgment on merits if the appellant or the appellant counsel is absent. It can only dismiss it for default. In fact, the latest judgment of the Supreme Court is 2021 CTC, page 237. It specifically says you cannot dismiss the appeal, you cannot dispose of the appeal on merits if the appellant is absent. It has to be dismissed only for default. Then appeals by indigent persons. Suppose I am declared a pauper in the trial court, then a fresh inquiry into pauperism is not required at the appellate stage. Whereas the defendant files the appeal against a decree, then he has to be admitted as a pauper by the appellate court before the appeal is taken on file. It is open to the government pleader to say that even though he was declared a pauper in the trial court, that is a plaintiff, but in the meantime, pendency of the suit or after the suit, he has become capable of paying the court fee. Therefore, he need not be admitted as pauper. That stand can be taken. But what I want to point out is, once a plaintiff has been declared a pauper, then he can automatically seek to file an appeal as a pauper and doesn't require any further inquiry. The most contentious one is the last point which I have shown in this slide. Whether I'm entitled to file an appeal against the findings alone. See, the appeal, section 96 says, I'm entitled to file an appeal against a decree. Originally, judgment and decree. Now the decree word has been omitted. Word retained is judgment. I'm just thinking aloud. Suppose there is a judgment in where I have contentions raised by both the parties. There are several issues. Some issues have gone against the defendant, but ultimately the suit is dismissed. What is the remedy of the defendant to upset the findings which have gone against it, which may have a bearing in the later stage between the same parties? Because suppose the plaintiff comes up with another suit, depending upon the findings which has already been done, whether I'll be entitled to file a finding, challenge the findings. The latest judgment 2019 SEC online says, no appeal against findings alone, but if those findings will amount to a res judicata between the same parties in a subsequent proceeding, then he should be allowed to canvass it by way of an appeal. Now, I would say that there is a change in the approach of the court, even in the CPC. When I discussed that in the Order 41 Rule 22 cross objections, when I am not entitled to file an appeal challenging the findings, a cross objection has been allowed by law to challenge the findings in a cross appeal. A cross appeal is but another independent appeal, but findings have been recorded. So, though this judgment dated 2019 says no appeal against findings, it says that there is an exception to the rule which says if those findings, if allowed to remain, will operate as res judicata in any subsequent proceeding between the same parties, then you are entitled to challenge it by way of an appeal. So this is as far as the appeals are concerned. Now your client comes, you are preparing the appeal, and the time of preparation of the appeal, you discuss, because it is a first appeal, or even if it's going to be a second appeal, we'll go over into threadbare into the facts, we'll try to prepare the grounds, and we realize that there have been omissions about filing of documents, or certain documents may not have been placed, some revenue records may not have been obtained and filed or exhibited before the court. So which would have been very relevant to decide certain issues between the parties. Are the parties remediless in those circumstances? It's a question which we have to pose to ourselves. There is a provision under Order 41 Rule 27 which enables the parties to file it as an additional document at the appellate court. It has always been a very confusing issue as to what is the scope of 4127. One judge will say, no, you have not filed it, you cannot. One judge will say it is only an extract of the revenue, no prejudice will be caused, I am going to take it on record. One judge will say you are allowed and you are cross-examined on all those issues, you are not produced it, therefore you cannot produce it here. One judgment says, no, you produce a Xerox copy, you have allowed it to be marked, but you are producing the original because your appeal itself, your case was disposed of, you have not production of the original, therefore you are allowed to produce it here. So the entire gambit of Order 27 has been going back and forth. Still, I would say that it is purely subjective, depending on the facts and how you are able to convince your judge, your applications will be taken on record. It has got no straitjacket formula. Normally is, I did not have the custody of those documents, or I have no knowledge about the existence of those documents, which I have come to know only now, which I am producing it now. That may be a very fair claim for reading additional evidence. And that document will clinch certain issues between the parties, even in respect of title. Suppose you are tracing title and you have a 1938 document or 1921 document, which you are not able to produce at the trial stage. You are now, though you might have referred to in the course of evidence, you are not produced it. Then you are entitled to produce it. So the question is how you are going to protect it before the court. Unless you have not had custody of it and you got it for the first time, now you can produce it. In fact, there was a judgment of his lordship, this is Bhanumati, which I didn't make a note here, where she says, if I'm going to produce the extract of the revenue record, like Adangal and the Chitta extract in the code, it doesn't require any further evidence. It is only an extract of the revenue. So it is a public document. The public document can be received at any stage. Therefore, I'm receiving it and application was taken on record and appeal was disposed of after receiving the additional documents. Now, if these fresh documents should remove a cloud on any issue is what is now, as I was saying earlier, in the course of trial, the plaintiff, one of the parties filed documents to receive certain documents. In the course of trial, sometimes you will say PW1 examine after plaintiff's evidence is closed, we'll file reopen, we'll recall, and then we'll file fresh documents. So it was refused by the trial court. Against which what they did was they filed a revision before the trial court. Revision was dismissed. The trial court disposed of the suit. In the appeal, what they was rejected by the trial court was sought to be produced by way of additional documents under Order 41 Rule 27. Now that has been 2015 1 ACC, page 665. That is a case where after the revision was dismissed, the party tried to file an application for receiving the very same document by way of Order 41 Rule 27. Which the court said, no, because you took up in revision, that becomes res judicator, and you cannot again revive it by way of an application under Order 41 Rule 27. Now, there are cases where regarding admissibility, it doesn't have stamps, it is not produced from proper custody, or this party cannot speak about the document. So various reasons the court may refuse to mark a document. So you have to raise grounds regarding that, and the document which was not marked in the course of trial can be filed under Order 41 Rule 27. Now, what 4127, the principles have been laid down in 2019 6 SEC page 82. Now, okay, we all know that 4127 will be heard along with the appeal. You cannot independently decide and pass an order. Okay, the judge hears the appeal and decides, yes, these documents are relevant. Once the court decides to receive those documents, then it is enjoined upon the court that notice should be given to the other side and he will be allowed to file, and he can object, they can allow to read evidence. Without evidence, mere filing of documents will not dispense with proof. That is what the judgment has said in 2018, 10 SEC, page 484. So you have to prove the documents. Mere admission of documents under 4128-27 will not dispense with proof. So the court has to give a reasoning judgment saying that in view of the application being allowed, I feel that the defendant the opposite side should be given an opportunity to lead evidence. In those cases, for consideration of that document and recording a finding alone, there can be an order of remand or order under Order 41 Rule 23A. 23, 26, 27. I'll come to that this in the subsequent slide. So, if you just cannot receive the documents, if the court decides to receive the documents, parties should be given an opportunity to object to it. This is the main crux of the matter. And an interesting case law on this 2010 8 SEC page 423 is a case where in a trademarks suit, the original trademark certificate was not marked at all. In fact, the extensive cross-examination has gone on and the suit was ultimately dismissed, saying that the original was not produced. The matter goes to the first appellate, the division bench. Division bench also says that then the matter goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, what is this? The procedure adopted by the trial judge is wrong. If he feels that the original certificate is important and it cannot be dispensed with, he could have called upon the plaintiff counsel to produce the original and then decided the issue. Instead of that, he cannot dismiss it only on the ground non-production of the original certificate. Therefore, the entire matter was remanded to the trial court for being for the production of the originals and then receipt and then further proof on that issue. Now, the court hears the first appeal or second appeal, whichever may be. It goes through the various voluminous documents and all that. Then it finds that there are certain lacuna. In fact, I would say the order of remand 23A was very much invoked by His Lordship Justice Raj Surya. So many cases he is remanded. Now there is a distinction between Order 41 Rule 23 Order of Remand and Order 41 Rule 23A Order of Remand. There are two types of remand. 41 Rule 23 speaks about a case where the suit is disposed of on a preliminary issue, like rejection of claim, bar of jurisdiction, that is jurisdiction issue, and bar under law. So what is the preliminary issue is defined under Order 14 Rule 2.2. So if the suit is disposed of on these preliminary issues, when the appellate court decides to set it aside, then it will have the power under Order 41 Rule 23 to restore the suit to file and directly retrial of the entire issues before the court. That is only under 41(23). Suppose under if it is not decided on preliminary issue, but it is decided on all other issues, then it is under 23A, where the court has to set aside the entire findings, remit it to the trial court for fresh disposal in accordance with law. That is under 23A. But there is another provision, like say now we file additional documents or some additional issues are raised in the appeal. The court feels that findings has to be recorded by the trial court on these additional issues. The court need not send the entire file back to the trial court or to the appellate court. What it can do is, it can retain the appeal on file. It can call for a finding from the trial court, limiting the scope of inquiry, including letting in evidence, to a particular issue alone, ask the learned judge to take a trial of that issue, record the finding and submit a report to the court. Once it is submitted to the court, then the court can give an opportunity of filing objections. Like, see, we have to file our memo of objections, like memo of grounds of appeal, how that finding is wrong. Then after that, the appeal can be disposed of. This is specifically provided under Order 41 Rule 25. In fact, that's what 2018 10 SEC page 484 says, that whenever there is an additional documents are received in appeal, we have to invoke 4125 and call for a finding. Because in a second appellate court, normally we don't allow, the courts don't allow recording of evidence. But even then, in one exceptional case, which we are conducting even today, the court has permitted the examination of a particular tahsildar and production of documents before the court. And in fact, a commissioner was appointed in the appellate court and second appellate court, and he has also filed a report. Examination of the commissioner is going on. So that is also provided under the act. So it is not that we have to send it back, but it can also be done by the appellate court. But there's a remand is three types. One is on preliminary issue, entirety goes. 23A, the entire findings have to be set aside and sent back. And the third one is keeping the file, calling for findings. Now, when a finding is called for, the learned judge or trial judge should not think that the entire facts are before him. He has to restrict his inquiry only to the scope of remand. He should not elaborate it and go into all other issues and redecide all other issues. That has to be kept in mind. Now, there is an order of remand under Order 41 Rule 23 or 23A, whatever it is. Now, in the scope of order of remand, the court would have decided certain issues, and on certain issues, it would have held that this is so. So, for this, I'm asking for a fresh trial. Now, what happens to those issues which are decided against a party in the order of remand? It will become res judicata if he doesn't file an appeal against that order under Section 105, read with Order 43, Rule 1U. So, an order of remand is appealable, and against the order of remand, you have a right of appeal to further appeal to the court. You have to challenge the order of remand. If you don't challenge the order of remand, all findings which are recorded therein will become res judicata between the parties. So be careful saying only order of remand or nothing. You must see what are the findings recorded in that order, which you cannot re-agitate in the next round. So that is very important. You have to see under 105.43A. Now, normally how we have our practicing is when any respondent wakalat comes, we just receive it and file it in court. please don't adopt that method. You ask the client and find out what are the decrees and what are the findings which have been recorded, so that you will know whether you have to file a cross objection or not. Please don't mechanically file a respondent wakalat, keep the bundle in the attic and sleep till the matter comes for final hearing, because that's not going to help you. So the moment you get a paper for filing respondent's wakalat, read the judgment, find what are all the points which have gone against your client, whether it requires a challenge, whether it is a finding, whether there is a decree against your client, advise him whether he has to file a separate appeal, and then be done with it. Because if there is going to be a decree against your client, who is a respondent, it has to be challenged by way of a separate appeal or by way of a separate cross objections under 4122. Mind it, it is decree. See, there are various clauses in the decree. One says declaration, one says injunction, one says recovery of possession, the one says money. So there are various clauses. You must see whether which clause is against your client. If there is any decree which is against your client, we have to file an appeal under order 41, separate appeal. If you are going to have a respondent wakalat, then you will have to file a cross objections. Now, there is a judgment where the suit is dismissed. The defendant is happy. He comes and gives a wakalat. We are also happy. We get a brief. We file the wakalat. We are relaxing. Before 1976, there was no provision for challenging a finding in a cross objection. As I said, there can be no appeal against a finding. Once a suit is dismissed, the appellant has got no opportunity to file an appeal because the entire suit has gone. So the findings had never become res judicata between the parties. But if the plaintiff comes by way of an appeal against a portion of the decree, then the defendant, if there are findings against him, has been now provided an opportunity to file a cross objection. And that is there in 2009, 13-9 ACC 261, where the pre-amendment and post-amendment are explained. Now, I found a judgment earlier in the Supreme Court that if I don't file an appeal, cross objections under Order 41 Rule 22, even challenging a finding, I cannot challenge it. But that has been set at rest. It is not correct. 2013-9 says it is given an option to challenge it. Otherwise, I can support the decree by saying that these findings should have gone against me. It is not a mandatory requirement that I should file a cross objection to challenge a finding, but it is separate that we can challenge it even without filing a cross objection. But there is no provision. Therefore, you please ensure, because we do not know how the law will change and how the interpretation will come in the years to come. So it is advisable that whenever findings are against the defendants also, it is better that you file a cross objections within the time frame which is provided under law. That is normally 30 days from the date of service of the memorandum of grounds of appeal. Now, cross objections are treated as separate appeals. Therefore, if the appeal is dismissed for default, or the appeal is compromised with only one particular respondent and he is trying to withdraw, it will not affect the cross objections filed by the other respondents. Therefore, it has to be decided and disposed of separately. In the initial years when I started practicing in the High Court, the cross objections were never given a separate number. The appeal with cross objections, that's all will be there. The cross objection was never given a separate number. So when the appeal died, the cross objections also died its natural death. The court forgot to give a separate finding for that. Sometimes cross objection will be only with reference to cost or something like that. So there was not a much hue and cry. But later we came to know that cross objections are also not being numbered separately. That is giving rise to a lot of confusion, because I am entitled to be heard on my cross objection where I have challenged certain findings. Therefore, the court now has ordered numbering of the cross objections also. So the cross objections are numbered separately. Now there is a difference between, now 4122, I don't file cross objections. Then what happens? There are several plaintiffs, several defendants. Cross appeals are filed and appeals are there. In one appeal, some of the parties have gone hand in glove and they are not willing to file separate appeal or cross objections. And the court finds I cannot give relief to the appellant unless I set aside the entire decree. If that is so, then it is not that the court is powerless because they have not filed cross objections. I cannot reverse the decree. All that is not there, because 41 Rule 33 empowers the court to reverse any finding and grant a decree in favor of the appellant before it. and even in favor of the respondents who are before it. See, suppose I cannot disturb a particular finding in favor of the appellant who was knocked at the door and he has not been guilty of delay and he has been fighting for his right because of others who have not coming forward to fight. He should not be harmed, he should not be prejudiced. So that was the reason why 4133 was enacted. 4133 gives an enormous power to the appellate court to reverse any finding to give justice to the appellant before it. Therefore, even if it's going to be setting aside certain findings in the interstate between the respondents or between the other parties or even in the cross suits, but for that, the setting aside, you will not be able to grant a relief which is justified as far as the court is concerned. Then you are entitled under the 4133 to grant a decree as prayed for. Now, if you see the relevant judgments are there, you can just look up 2003 9 SEC 606. Then we have 2010 10 SEC 458, 2016 13 SEC 165. Now, for Srinivasa Raghavan, I think I can add this 2023 CPC 157, which enables the court to grant an enhanced compensation for the respondent, even in the absence of a cross objections, or you don't file an appeal because it says just claims, and that is justified under Order 41, Rule 33. Mm-hmm. Now, in a recent judgment in 2019, 6 CTC 385, His Lordship Justice R. Subramaniam has said, in a suit for partition, there was an apportionment of shares, and only one of them came before the court questioning the decree. The court has to modify the share. So even though the court wants to modify the share, some of them have not challenged the decree. The court said, no, we are not powerless under 4133. I'll have a right to modify the decree, and therefore a share was modified, invoking the powers under Order 41, Rule 33. Now coming to second appeal, I think because Srinivasa Raghavan shared my PPT, the number of participants has fallen from...
No, being a Sunday morning and there are some 4 or 5 webinars simultaneously at the same time.
You said that it is going to be a very, like a music academy, they said it's a most sought after time and you've made everybody sleep.
Probably today, a lot of, I think, webinars clash simultaneously at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's another reason.
Okay. Anyway, the PPT is there, it is for them to work it on.
And you got a great fanfare in YouTube recording, madam. You just see your YouTube video, you stand second, more than nearly 10,000 views for your session on pleadings. Amazing.
Okay.
So live is different and the record version is different.
Okay. Now coming to second appeal, which for which alone Srinivasa Raghavan wanted me to make a present. I said yes. I cannot do a justification to that because Supreme Court has not given me justification to elaborate on that. Every time it is so subjective that they keep changing their positions up and down. Yeah. I am not in a position to still understand what is substantial question of law. Therefore, what I have tried to do is I have consolidated some of the judgments which I felt relevant to know what is a substantial question of law. Now, before I go to that, you all know that under second appeal under section 100 can be admitted only on a substantial question of law. It cannot be filed. It can be admitted. It can be filed numbered, but it can be admitted and taken on file only on a substantial question of law. Now, what is a substantial question of law is what is a very tricky one, which Srinivasa Raghavan was trying to say that you must try to explain. I said I must have very good English knowledge to prepare a substantial question of law. What is question of law to me may not be a question of law to Srinivasa Raghavan. It may not be to a judge. Therefore, it is absolutely subjective that it is very difficult to put it within a particular frame and say this is substantial question of law. But I have just put up some of the case laws where I will point out that how some of them have been considered to be a question of law. Now, before going into that, suppose I file the appeal with a question of law. But sometimes we are all becoming wiser day by day. So by the time the final hearing of the second appeal comes after 10 years, yeah, we know that what is this? We have taken this question of law. We should have taken that question of law. So what we do, we try to argue all that and say, so Lord, we have to frame another question of law. So like that, only to enable such attitude of our group that we do with a slipshod manner. Oh, today is this judge, so he'll give me liberal in admission. So I'll prepare question of law like this. But ultimately, when it comes before a tough judge for final hearing, we'll be groping with the dark as to what is the actual substantial question of law. So to enable such latches on the part of the advocates, it is provided under the proviso to section 105 that court can frame additional substantial question of law at the hearing of the second appeal. That is the judgment in 2018 18 SEC 727.
727.
2018 6 SEC 727 and 2019 6 SEC 686, where the courts have power under the proviso to 100 subclause 5 to frame additional substantial question of law at the time of hearing. So don't worry about the question of law framed at the time of admission. You can be free to argue your appeal on the additional substantial question of law, for which you can file a memo, convince the judge, etc. Of course, it is always left to the judge. Now, what is the meaning of a substantial question of law is answered in 2019 7 SEC 641 and 2016 10 SEC 315. What they say is, what is how to say that? What is a reasonable man's perspective of the entire view? And if it is contrary to that, then you can frame a question of law saying that this is perverse, this is unreasonable, like that. So I would only say that it's an absolute jugglery of your English language to say what is a substantial question of law. In my opinion, if I'm able to convince the judge there is no appreciation of evidence on record, then it becomes a question of law. If I'm able to convince the judge there is no consideration of the documents on record, it becomes a question of law. If I say the interpretation of the document which has been adopted by the court is wrong, it's a question of law. If the expert evidence has not been admitted or not even looked into, it's a question of law. If the advocate commissioner's report for which no objections has been filed has not been filed or ignored by the court, it becomes a substantial question of law. So what is not question of law is that on the available evidence on record, you are able to show that the omission on the part of the court will lead to injustice and you will not be able to come to the conclusion or the findings recorded by the court, it becomes a question of law. That's why I'm saying, what do you mean by in fact, this is a reappreciation of evidence? What is perverse findings? That is 2018 18 SEC 303. What is a perverse finding? Perverse finding is defined in that. So for perverse finding, it doesn't mean that the court says what is appreciation, reappreciation, and the discussion of that comes in the next slide, I think. So what is a perverse finding is, I purposely ignore a particular judgment. Suppose in promissory note cases or in even in settlement deeds or will or etc. In the cross examination, the defendant would have blurted out and you would have made certain admissions. But however, in the generality, if you read the evidence, it will not be visible. So if the court omits certain admissions which have been very fatal to the case in the course of evidence, that also becomes, though it may be amounting to appreciation of evidence, an omission to consider the evidence also will become a substantial question of law. Now the courts have said that even if you are going to dismiss the appeal at the time of admission, it has to be by giving reasons, and there can be no second appeal if the value is less than 25,000 and below. That is 1 or 2. Therefore, I have now in this I have clearly shown that questions relating to contents and admissibility of documents have been considered to be a question of law. Failure to appreciate or ignoring expert evidence is considered to be a question of law. Then there are documents of diverse title holders. The appreciation of the title, how you trace the title, if there has been any mistake in that, that also amounts to a question of law. Then when there is findings, the latest one is if it is dehorsed the pleadings based on no evidence, misreading of documents, contrary to any provision, no judge could have reasonably come to the conclusion. In fact, I have an experience in one matter where I succeeded. In fact, it was a concurrent finding. But usually, being a trial lawyer, I always read the papers from the beginning, that is start of the plaint. So I never go by read the judgment first. I read the plaint, written statement, evidence, documents, then evidence, then only I go to the findings of the courts. So this helps me to find out where I am in the second appeal. When I was looking up, I found that on the pleadings, on the plaint averments, the should have been dismissed. But the entire plaint pleadings has been given a go by. And what was developed in the course of the evidence alone is relied on by the courts below to give a decree in favor of the plaintiff. So I pointed out now whatever the court has held on the basis of the evidence on record is contrary to what has been pleaded. So any amount of evidence without pleadings is a zero. Therefore, that cannot be relied on. You go by the pleadings and dismiss the suit. And in fact, that was judgment in my favor, and the appeal was second appeal was allowed in spite of the fact that it was a concurrent finding. Then we have this 19.6 SCC 399 to say, because the second appeal judgment reappreciates or discusses the evidence, it doesn't mean that it is reappreciating. They made a distinction between appreciation, reappreciation, and discussion of evidence while answering substantial question of law. Then you have that non-consideration of material evidence. Then issue not decided by the court below. Suppose several issues are framed on issues omitted, but it is not answered, which is very relevant for disposal of the suit. Then that can also be considered by the High Court in second appeal, and it can be disposed of. Then last but not the least is the appeal against orders. Now, if you see the appeal against orders, these orders are mostly interlocutory or in the course of execution proceedings. Where these orders affect the rights of parties and bring a finality to the proceeding, they are allowed to be appealed against. But because of the orders, the appeals, the proceedings are not disposed of, but they are allowed to continue, then appeals are not provided. You have given only a right of revision under 115. Even that has been now curtailed to a far extent, saying it is going to be irretrievable, irregular, or material, all that is there, unless it finally disposes of the suit. In fact, they come in pari materia with the appeal provision. Now, if you see what is section 35 is a compensatory cost for false or vexatious claims or defenses. Then we have refusing leave to sue. Then compensation for obtaining arrest. Then ordering. Then I am not going to each and every clause because you are all clear about it. It is available in the provisions itself. So I don't want to elaborate on that. So it clearly says you have to, where your rights are denied, like the setting aside ex parte decree. You take an application and setting aside ex parte decree. So you always get confused whether I have to file an appeal or I have to file a revision. If the setting aside application is dismissed, the person who is aggrieved is nothing further to grind in the court because he has lost his opportunity and the whole thing comes to a finality. So he is given a right of appeal. But if the application is allowed, the suit continues and he still has an opportunity to contest the merits of the claim. Therefore, he is not given a right of appeal. So this is how the entire wording in Order 43 Rule 1 runs. And you can make a note of it that when your rights are denied, then you are entitled to file an appeal. Then one point is under Order 39, you have a right of injunction. If there is, though it is an interim injunction, if it is not happily worded, you have a right of appeal. And even if it is not disposed of within 30 days, you have a right of appeal under the provisions of the code. Therefore, that is all as far as Order 43 Rule 1 is concerned. And I think I can say a thank you for giving me this opportunity with 20 minutes or not 20 minutes.
Thank you, madam. You have proved to be a firebrand once again. I envy your flow of language that we call you as a Tufan Express, AK-47, like.
Yeah, otherwise I can't cover all these here. It's very difficult.
I understand, very reasonable. And in a nutshell, you were able to almost bring out the essential ingredients of scope and ambit of appeals.
Although every day we fight in courts for these, only these highlighted.
Only these parameters. I understand.
Oh, I thought I'll concentrate on that.
Basically, what appellate counsel, side counsel requires is totally covered, I think.
As a practicing lawyer, what we know, I have shared. That's all.
Exactly. So, as a practicing lawyer, I understand what exactly is covered by you, ma'am. Thank you very much. And I have only one thing to say. Can you just explain the scope of Section 105 CPC?
105 is the order of remand.
No, I think other orders, when you are supposed to,
is maintainable.
And you are not supposed to file a revision of an order in IA along with the appeal, unless it's going to affect the merits of the main case. Can you just, because there are some cases where there are no revisions against the IA in the particular judgment, where the final judgment only is challenged, because the order in the IA has affected the final judgment of the court below.
So that's what I already indicated, no? That under Order 43, 105, it with Order 43, 1U.
1U.
Yes. It specifically says that if you have not challenged that, then you have to challenge it only. If it is not covered by 1U, then you have to, in fact, you can see Order 43, Rule 1U.
Yeah. This is the area where most of the counsels find it a little bit difficult, not able to comprehend. That's why you want you to elaborate.
No, in fact, Order 43, Rule 1U is about, I spoke about the challenging an order against an order of remand.
Remand, but
That
this
is
is
the second
something.
portion of 105.
Yeah.
See, the order 105 subclause 2 must be read with order 43 rule 1U.
Okay.
Okay.
My
First part is concerned. That's what I said. If I'm not, the other case I pointed out that I filed an application for receiving documents. It was rejected and revision was filed and it was dismissed. So I tried to file it as an additional document in the appeal. The Supreme Court said, no, you have lost your right because you ought not to challenge it in revision. You should have raised it as a grounds of appeal. So what 105 says is, if I have no right under the appealable orders, I don't have any right of appeal against particular order not specified mentioned here. There are various orders against which an appeal is provided in order 43 rule 1. And I also pointed out 35, 144, order 21 rule 58, or 28 to be a decree. If there's no provision for appeal, then you have to think twice before you come to court for CRP. That's what I'm saying. Otherwise, because you will have that right to challenge it in the grounds of appeal itself and say that you should have given me this opportunity, you should have, therefore you will have a right to remand under order 21, 41 rule 23A, which you will lose if you get a finality before the High Court. That's what sometimes if you go for an admission, the judge says, no, I'm going to dismiss your revision, we withdraw the revision income. But
I just request you to give me elaboration the second limb of section 105. But
yes, notwithstanding anything for which an appeal does not lie, shall be any part in order. That's what
no, second limb of 105 subclause 1, but where the decree is appealed from.
That's what I'm saying.
Any order, any error, defect, or irregularity. So, what I just want you to know, for example, a suit is disposed of simultaneously with an IA thereon. Both the IA and this judgment are against the plaintiff.
Simultaneously, Raghavan, I need not be simultaneously. What it says is, in the course of trial or in the course of the suit, I would file several applications. It need not be order 39 because it is appealable. Order 40 is appealable. Order 38.5 is appealable. So you remove all the orders passed under order 43 rule 1. So you have a right of appeal. If you don't exercise your right of appeal, you lose. You cannot challenge it at all. But there are orders for which no provision for appeal is there. You can only file a revision. So exercising the power of revision is only a doctrine of election. If you want, you can file, or you need not file. You contest the suit, and ultimately, if the judgment goes against you, when you file an appeal against that order, against the judgment, you say, mention specifically in your grounds, this IA ought to have been allowed. If this had been allowed, I would have been given this decree in my favor. This finding would have gone in my favor, like appointment of advocate commissioner or measurement of the property, where the identity of the property is there. That's a dispute. We should have allowed me to go to the ground level and point out the mistakes. Like that, you have to raise it in the grounds itself. If you don't raise it in the grounds, then you will not be entitled to challenge. You have to specifically mention the IA and raise the ground. That is very important. That's what 105.1 says.
Two riders. One, the orders is not appealable. Number two, it might have affected the final disposal of this suit.
Yes.
That be the case, you can canvass the point in the appeal itself by raising separate grounds against the order that has been passed.
Separate grounds. If you omit to raise, you are not challenged.
That's one. Okay. Ms. Veronica, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Ma'am, you said when you go for an appeal, even if the party who's not in an appeal, there is, like you cited an example of a partition where there is a revision of shares. So will not that other person who's agreed now go for another appeal? Will it not amount to multiple cases again?
No. See, it's only in his presence everything is done. No. See, all the parties are before court. In the partition suit, everybody is a plaintiff, everybody is a defendant. So that's not an issue. The court can alter the shares. But even in not suit for declaration, cross suits are there. Even then, suppose some of the parties don't file an appeal and they are arrayed as defendants. But if their rights are also going to be affected, but their rights cannot that is a decision in the appeal in favor of the appellant cannot be decided or granted a decree unless you disturb those findings. 4133 comes to an end.
Okay, ma'am. So
understand it like that. See, when an appellant comes to me today, I am a judge. He comes to me and I am convinced with this argument. I feel I should grant relief to him. But what is preventing me from giving relief to the appellant? I feel is justified. But there are certain findings between other persons who have not filed an appeal. Neither have they filed an appeal, nor have they filed a cross objection. Am I powerless to grant a relief to the appellant to whom I feel that justice is to be done? Then power under 4133 comes.
Yes, ma'am. But if those persons are not on record and if they are affected, will
No,
they?
no. They have to be shown as respondents. Otherwise, you cannot grant relief.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
That's what you see. You must read the section clearly. Respondents. Persons who are not party, you cannot grant a relief. You must, if the appellant wants a relief, in respect of setting aside certain findings of the respondent, they have to be made a party. Without them, you cannot do it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Excellent session.
Thank you, Veronica, ma'am. Ma'am, there are two questions to the private chat. I don't know why they haven't asked you straight. Number one, one question is very interesting. The person asked, why should there be an abatement to appeal? Because already the rights of the parties have been adjudged in the suit itself. If you just say that there will be no abatement in appeal as it is done in the case of execution, let the abatement proceedings be restrained only to original stage, suit stage. Let there be no abatement in appeal so that the time spending in filing the application can be saved. What's your expert opinion? He says that
appeal is a continuation of a suit. It is not an independent proceeding. It's a continuation of a suit. See, judgment is but an opinion of a judge. So that judge can, the appellate judge can reverse the opinion. He can give a different opinion. So when a person is before another court, he must know whether I'm going to prosecute it or not. If a person dies and his legal heirs are not interested, why that should be pursued at all? So therefore, the question of abatement is very much irrelevant because the time is going on running. You just can't wait in the courts without a sense of time and say that we are delayed, we are sleeping on the piles of typesets which are available in the High Court. And still without an abatement, even after 10 years, the second appeals are being listed, we are asking for time to set aside abatement. See, abatement has to be there because we have to have some type of finality. If there is no finality, there is no abatement at all. Who is going to prosecute the appeal? Will the legal heirs come on record? You have to be diligent in prosecuting the appeal. That's the reason why that is bringing about a diligence and bringing about a finality. The courts have the provisions have been incorporated.
He has drawn
abatement relaxed after so many years the second appeals are being listed. So naturally all abatements are being set aside and appeals have to be disposed of at merits only.
He just draws comparison to Order 22 Rule 12. When there is no abatement in EP, why should there be abatement in the appeal?
See, EP means where there is already a finality, he has to working out his rights. A right has already been decreed and given to him in a golden platter. He has to realize the fruits of the decree, for which the respondent, the judgment debtors are duty bound to hand it over. He doesn't, in fact, if you have fought it up to the tooth nail up to Supreme Court and you're not prepared to hand over possession to him, and you will die and you will allow your third party to come and sit in the property. Therefore, they say there's no question of abatement for it because I already won the race. I'm trying to get the fruits of my race. Therefore, the EP abatement is not there.
So comparison of EP and appeal is not proper.
Appeal is not possible.
Okay. Next question. Another person posted. It seems he said whether an appeal can be dismissed for non-prosecution if no steps are taken to impede the LR of the deceased appellant. Is it a matter for dismissing the appeal as abated or dismissing the appeal as non-prosecution?
Dismiss the appeal as abated.
It seems that his has been dismissed as a non-prosecution. This is for default.
Okay. So, okay, maybe not. See, non-prosecution is only when the person is alive that can be non-prosecution.
That's what.
If the person is dead, it can be only abated because the legal heirs are not there.
Only abatement, only the only way out. And the third question is very interesting. It seems there has been a delay of 14 years in readmitting in second appeal. When the second appeal was posted for final disposal, both the sole appellant and sole respondent were dead. Counsels for both the parties were dead. So after 14 years, 12 years, when the EP was filed by one of the LRs of the party, the LRs of the appellant have woken up and they have filed an application to readmit the appeal with a petition to condone the delay. It seems the bench has chosen to condone the delay on imposition of cost of rupees 1 lakh. The cost has been paid and the delay has been condoned. Okay. Subsequently, what happened? The application filed by the petitioner to bring the LRs of the deceased appellant on record has been taken on file. there has been a delay, the delay will be at least 3 months more than what is the delay for setting aside abatement. The subsequent judge of the same High Court has dismissed the application to condone the delay in bringing the LR. Though the restoration application has been allowed on payment of cost, and the cost has been paid, and the appeal was taken on file once again. Subsequently, an application to condone the delay in bringing the LR of the same appellant, sole appellant, has been dismissed. So he said whether the procedure or not with High Court is.
File a review.
So probably, I think that could have been avoided, right? Because having spent 1 lakh as cost.
Correct.
Okay. Then Mr. PVS Giridhar want to ask a question to you.
Yes.
Mr. Giridhar, sir.
Hello. Good morning.
Hello,
Good afternoon.
Chitra. Good afternoon. It was wonderful listening to you. Learned a lot in your session. Just have one question. You said that if there is an order which is not appealable and I file a CRP against it, I am barred from raising that issue again if the CRP is dismissed. But if the CRP is not dismissed on merit, without giving a finding on the merit, the CRP is dismissed. Will it still be res judicata? So I can still raise it, isn't it?
The court has rejected your prayer in that case, which is the Supreme Court. The court has again rejected and confirmed the order of the court saying that he is not entitled to produce the document. You cannot produce it by way of additional document is what they say. So if you agitate it in the revision and the revision gives a quietus to that particular issue in the interlocutory stage, then it becomes res judicata.
All right.
You cannot re-agitate it in the grounds of appeal. Because you're asking another co-judge to revise the order of the another High Court judge.
Of a coordinate, yeah. I
You
understand.
see it like that. See, it's the same. Suppose the revision is before the sub-court. Some revisions can be DMC court, it's before the sub-court. If you are coming in the second appellate stage, in the second appellate stage, you can challenge the order of the lower appellate court.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That way, see, you must see, because now in the CRP is disposed of the High Court.
Yeah.
Now again you bring it up again, that is again finality. Now you again raise it in the appeal ground. If it is a first appeal to the High Court or a second appeal to the High Court, then there is another co-judge who is going to decide the correctness
Yes,
of that.
I understand.
See, that is the reason why they say don't do it. You cannot do it.
It is open to me to raise it in a second appeal in a High Court, even if I was not disabled from raising it in the first appeal. Is that so?
No, you have to raise it. If you have not challenged it, becomes fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giridhar. Let's move to Mr. K. Shankar Raman.
Madam, in one appeal, madam, the sole defendant first originally remained ex parte. So he entered appearance, he did not file written statement. And later on, the suit itself was dismissed. Instead, the plaintiff filed the appeal. The defendant also organized a party and received the summons. Now, whether he can file the written statement even without filing a separate petition, permission petition.
In appeal court,
appeal court.
Written statement.
Unless it is remanded.
இங்க வந்து எங்க விட்டீங்களோ see அப்பீல்ல என்ன பண்றோம், கீழே கொடுத்திருக்கிற ஜட்ஜ்மெண்ட் வந்து ஆன் தி ரெக்கார்ட்ஸ் அவைலபிள் பிஃபோர் தி கோர்ட், அவர் சரியான தீர்ப்பு சொல்லி இருக்கிறாரா என்றுதான் பாக்குறோம்.
எஸ் சார்.
நீங்க அடிஷனலா டாக்குமெண்ட் போட்டு ரிட்டன் ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட் போட்டு கீழே இருக்கிற ஜட்ஜ்மெண்ட் தப்புன்னு எப்படி சொல்ல முடியும்? அதுக்கு ஒரு வாய்ப்பு அளிக்கப்படணும். 4127ல தான் வாழ்வு. நீங்க இங்க வந்து ரிட்டன் ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட்லாம் போட முடியும்.
I already remained ex parte before the lower court.
அதுக்கு என்ன பண்ண முடியும்? You have lost your right to file a written statement.
இப்ப இந்த ஸ்டேஜ்ல வந்து இப்ப நான் வந்து அப்பியர் ஆகணுமா வேண்டாம்? அப்பீல்ல
அப்பியர் ரைட் ரிமாண்ட் கேட்கணும் அவ்வளவுதான்.
அப்பியர் ரைட் ரிமாண்ட் கேட்க. எஸ் எஸ். தேங்க்ஸ் சார். தேங்க்ஸ்.
I'm right, ma'am?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Vishal.
Ma'am, I just have a small question. One, this is regarding an execution of a degree. The judgment debtors remain ex parte. They do not file their counter objections. They have been made ex parte. They go in a CMP. One of them goes in a CMP before the High Court. And in the state petition in that same CMP, both the judgment debtors are a party. The main CMP la ஒரே ஆள்தான் party இருக்காங்க. It is subsequently ordered, stay is dismissed. The judge passes an interim order, final order, saying you deposit X amount and you can become a party again to the execution proceedings. Can both of them now come and become party in the EP court?
No. See, what the court has granted permission only to one JD to participate, not both.
Not to both. But the executing court has taken inference that the order passed by the court making them ex parte has been reversed by the High Court.
See, you must see what is the order has been passed. See, for each and every defendant, there will be a separate ex parte order. There cannot be a common order. Each defendant or each respondent will be set ex parte separately. So each respondent will have an independent right to set aside the order. One cannot represent the other. So you tell the court, only this respondent has taken up in the revision and only his revision has been allowed. Therefore, you cannot allow the other respondent to contest.
All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Mr. K. Subramanian.
I have a doubt, madam. Under what provision of law, madam, a party is directed to deposit in NJS non-judicial stamp for issuing a copy, certificate copy from the court, madam, copy section?
Non-judicial stamp only for engrossing a decree, not for others.
Yeah, madam. If commissioner report copy,
Commissioner report non-judicial stamp sir.
The exhibit a mark on a report NJS kekrang, madam.
No, sir. Sir. NJS only for engrossing a compromise decree or a partition decree where you have to go and register it to make it perfect. NJS is not asked for a certified copy. Certified copy is normal court fee stamps. Court, if a commissioner's report is forming part of a decree, of a partition decree where he has meets and bounds report or particular declaration encroachment suits handing over question ABCD mark when that becomes part of a decree, then it will be engrossed on the NJS stamps if you want. Not in all cases. NJS stamps is called for only for partition suits, not for others. நீங்க the decree நீங்க register பண்ணனும்னா நீங்க certificate copy வாங்கிட்டு போய் நீங்க register பண்ணிக்கணும். அவ்வளவுதான். NJS stamps அதை கேட்கவே முடியாது.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am. A very, very interesting lecture, and it's practical also. Not a question of saying something which is not going to help us in the practice. I hope all the advocates who practice in the appraisal would have been very much benefited. Thanks a lot for your time and energy. Once again, thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.